action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Carolyn Barclay. A strategy-first copywriter based in Melbourne, Carolyn is hell-bent on helping brands sound like actual humans instead of soulless robots sent from the future to bore us to death. She's also bossing it up as co-founder of Kingswood Palmerston, a creative consultancy dedicated to solving marketing puzzles for B2B and making ads for ad agencies. Carolyn says, unless you're a fat and happy category leader, you literally can't afford to blend in. Big brands have the budget to bury you under a mountain of content until no one can hear you scream. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Hello, Giles. How you doing?
Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, I'm awesome.
Good stuff. Right, we've got our 7 quickfire questions, Carolyn. Number 1, a Gmail or Hotmail?
Hotmail. It's coming back. It's going to be cool again.
You love Hotmail.
I do.
Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan?
Oh, Joni Mitchell.
Snoop Dogg or Elroy the cat?
Elroy the cat. Has to be.
Melbourne or Canberra?
Melbourne, because Canberra's a hole.
I was hoping you'd say that. Sing or write?
Singing for sure. Yeah, I know I'm good at that, whereas the writing makes me, I'm not quite as sure of myself, even though that's what I now do, but there you go.
Yeah, we'll touch on both those things then. 2 more, stealing pens or shrinking jumpers?
Oh, see, that's a hard one because I'm good at both. But I'm going to go with stealing pens because it's a much more marketable skill. Let's go with that.
And last one, advertise yourself or do the client work?
Advertising yourself, that's got to be, it's more fun, isn't it?
It is more fun. It's a conundrum though, isn't it? And a common problem.
You guys should know. You're doing a great job of that. Loving it.
Well, we're trying. I think probably it stands out because so few seem to do it.
Well, I think you'd find, even so, it's a cut above. We're very big fans of what you do.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We always start the show by celebrating weird and wonderful ways our guests have ended up where they currently are. So you've already given a hint to singing and songwriting, I know, as part of your journey. And very few copywriters we've spoken to seem to have a linear path, which I think just makes them more interesting. So could you tell our listeners what was your first ever job? And then what was your first kind of proper copywriting role?
Sure. So I'm sort of going to cheat and say 2 for my first ever job because the very first time I ever got paid was actually singing at my primary school teacher's daughter's wedding. And I sang Amazing Grace and I got paid $10. And I was very enchanted with the whole, exchanging your skills for money. And I don't think that ever left me. So I think that's it's important to put that out there. So I think that played into my confidence in terms of going freelancing. That's a thing. But in terms of my first uni job, I was a sales assistant in a cut price menswear store called Lowe's, which anyone from the whole that is Canberra will know what I'm talking about. It's a bit of an institution there, but I learned a lot about sales in that role. So I think I wrote a piece about this actually, but I used to spend the weekends in the suit department because we got $10 for every suit that we sold. So that was a pretty attractive thing for a uni student. And I had this whole routine that I would do every weekend. I'd park myself just near the suits, wait for someone to look super lost, and then just pounce and I'd do my thing. But we had this really shitty sales pitch that we were given to do, which was basically, it's $99 for a suit. For that price, you could either hire one or you can keep it and buy one here. And it's okay, yeah. Get what you're saying. But it occurred to me after a while that the people that would shop in the store didn't want to own a suit. And herein lies the problem.
They didn't want to wear a suit. They didn't want to be near a suit.
No, nothing to do with a suit. So a lot of people came in really shopping for an occasion, usually their wedding, to attend one or their own. And I think I quickly came to understand that if I got them to try it on, that was kind of the whole deal, because once they saw themselves in the suit, they were able to conceptualize themselves as someone who might look okay in a suit. Because like I always say, every guy looks good in a suit, even a shitty one that you wouldn't want to stand too close to an open flame in. So I had this whole routine where I was like, I'd make it into a makeover show. I'd be grabbing a shirt. I get in trouble all the time for unpacking the shirts, but I was like, well, I'm selling suits, so, it works. Grab a tie, all this, the whole thing, get them to tie the whole thing on. And I just used to love what they'd put the suit on, they come out and they'd do this little thing where they'd stand back on one heel. And I was like, got it. That's sold.
Is that what it was? Standing back on one heel?
People take this little step back and it's like they just sort of relax into it. It's like, yep, they're seeing themselves. And they're either seeing themselves standing next to their, partner at the wedding, or they're seeing themselves standing at the altar waiting for it, or walk down the aisle, and they're just loving themselves sick. And you're like, yep, I don't have to do anything else. We're done here.
So your job was just to get them in the suit,
yeah,
and then the
absolutely.
rest just took care of itself.
Absolutely. Easiest $10 you'll ever make, apart from singing Amazing Grace.
Apart from singing, yeah. There's $10 again.
Yeah, it's a magic number.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, I've definitely been firmly in that segment of guys who don't particularly like wearing suits.
More than one of them used the words straitjacket. So that was probably one of my clues, that they didn't really like them and didn't see space for one in their closet, I guess.
Yeah. And how long were you doing that for?
I was probably there for probably 2 years, I'd say. And I almost forgot to leave, because once I got my real job, I kept working their weekends. And at one point my manager's like, you're working 7 days a week. I was like, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. I just sort of forgot to leave. So he almost had to fire me. But anyway.
How many suits did you sell in a day? What was your record, do you know?
I think the best I did was 6. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but not that many people come in to buy a suit at Lowe's, because it's basically organised polyester. It's not like it's not a great suit,
Yeah, it's not Savile Row.
That's it.
Nice. Oh, it's good job though. And what were you studying at uni at the time?
I was studying marketing and advertising. My first role in marketing ended up being in product line control for Avon. And it was not what I had imagined or had in mind. I had already decided I wanted to be a copywriter in an advertising agency, which is hard to do from Canberra. I think we had 1 or 2 advertising agencies there at the time that would be, you'd have heard of them or knew they were even there. And I didn't want to live there anymore. So I was sort of trying to get into the Sydney crowd. But the thing about advertising, I don't know if this has even changed, but you get an advertising degree and no one actually ever told me I need a book. No one ever told me how to get into advertising. So it really just felt like I was just like a cat scratching at a glass door. Like I'm just not getting anywhere, and I had no idea how to get in. So, the obvious thing to do is to apply for a job where you write a cover letter, and that's marketing. That was the way into that. And that job at Avon, I found really depressing, because it wasn't even marketing in the terms like you sort of like we think of 1P marketing now. It's like, no, product line control is very much about managing stock levels. So it was my job to organise the bargain bin catalogue, and I had a sales target I had to meet, and I would have to figure out how many units of, I think I used the example recently of a dancing, singing in the rain bear, because it sold really well one year and then no one wanted one ever again for obvious reasons. So how much did I have to price that at to move a certain amount of stock but also reach my sales targets for that catalogue? So this is not what I had envisaged myself doing in a marketing career. So I was very, very depressed. But I actually came to really value those skills ultimately, because I think it did give me a good start. And then I moved into more generalist marketing roles after that. So I bring all of that in my little suitcase with me into my copywriting career that I've sort of carved out for myself now. So I think it's valuable.
And I do want to move past that kind of early stage, but I also do want, before we do that, I want to ask more about the singing. So I say this, you'll be surprised to hear I've never been paid to sing, but presumably at 11, being paid to sing, does that not ignite something? That surely there was something else going on the side during this job at Lowe's and university and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I could sing before I could talk. I was in my pram at Christmas time and my mum was in a shop and I was apparently singing along to Jingle Bells, just sort of da, da, da. And the the lady turned to my mum and said, "That baby's singing." And I really never stopped. It was easy as breathing for me. So it was just always part of my life. Performing was part of my life. And talking about how songwriting is impacted that. I mean, the performance side as much as anything, because my mum was a folk singer as well. She performed in Melbourne in, quite significant venues during the 60s and 70s. And she always taught me, you show up for an audience and they're not there to see you. And that's the same with my writing. They're not there to read what I've written. I'm there to help them experience an emotion that they want to experience. So I think that impacted me as much as anything in terms of the songwriting. But so that was always something that I was working on in the background.
And do you think that's partly why because obviously marketing and advertising degrees are by design quite broad typically. It gives you exposure of all sides and all directions. But do you think that's why you fell into copywriting? I say fell into, I mean, it's all part of the same industry. But was it that use of words and language and emotion, as you say, that led you, do you think, to a copywriting career?
Yes, I remember I took the copywriting courses specifically. Like, we didn't have to take those. I could have taken, I don't even remember what the alternative was, but I remember taking that course and thinking, this is really going to help me with my songwriting skills because it's that whole thing of having one idea that you're trying to communicate. It almost has to be a campaignable idea in a song because you have to make it go for you have to express it 3 different ways for each of the verses. You have to set up this tension in the story and then resolve it. Like, there are just so many commonalities between a song and an ad. Yeah, I do remember thinking, like, this is really going to help me write better songs.
Yeah, well, no, of course it would. Of course it would. So do you still write songs? Do you still sing? And can we hear you sing? Not now, I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily, but is there anywhere we can link to in this episode so we can hear you sing?
No, I haven't sung in public. My kids tell me to shut up. I'm like, I used to get paid. People used to pay just to hear me sing. Jeez. Anyway, no, I don't have anything out there at the moment, I'm sorry to say. I would love to do it in the future though, so you never know.
It's just reminded me of that lovely, I mean, it gets shared quite widely nowadays, but I remember when first stumbling upon it and we blogged about it on the Gasp site about 10 years ago, that lovely piece from Gary Provost, When the Writing Sings, and that kind of melody that you find in writing and words.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
It starts, this sentence has 5 words.
Oh, of course. I just didn't know it by name. Yes, I love that.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. So given that there was some, maybe not full intention, but there was some intention to be a musician, do you think there is an overlap there that should be maybe more kind of exploited by people in music, like writing great copy by studying songwriting? There must be so many similarities, albeit perhaps one is more artistic than the other, although maybe that's not even true.
I think it hones your metaphor writing abilities the most, because you do use that when you're doing that artistic kind of writing. And I think I get a little bit annoyed sometimes, like people talk about the fact that copywriting isn't creative. And it's like, well, yes, it needs to be clear over clever, but you don't have to choose. Like, I get what they're saying. You don't want to lose the message in a creative turn of phrase, but someone who's really good at it can definitely do both at the same time. And I think songwriting, the metaphors that you learn to put together, and they need to be original too. Like, everyone gets sick of hearing the same, lines or the same metaphors in music. You can't beat them too much to death. And I think, in poetry and stuff, I've been liking a lot of poetry on Twitter lately, and I think the modern poetry and some songwriting, they have this ability to use quite fearless language. And that's something I talk about an awful lot in terms of writing. And I'm not sure I always explain what I mean by that, but it's using those really ugly words sometimes, or ugly imagery, or even just, it doesn't have to be ugly, but just really putting it out there in these really simple terms that people can't look away from. And it can be quite shocking sometimes, but in a good way. It's something I love about Joni Mitchell's lyrics particularly. Oh, and Paul Simon too, actually. I mean, who else can get away with putting, you think about Graceland lyrics, especially something like, Call Me Al, and he's got all these crazy words in there. You think, who else could put that in a song and get away with it? It's just, masterful. But so yeah, long story short, it's the metaphor writing abilities. And I think Ian Pritchard brought this up when I was having a chat with him. The way that I wrote about in that article, Pat Patterson in his How to Write Better Lyrics book talks about writing in the key of an idea. So Ian sort of made a link between that and category entry points. And that kind of blew my mind, because I thought that's actually a really great way for a copywriter to start coming up with ideas, because if you start with that category entry point of what situation is someone in when they start to think about, I need to find a solution for this problem, and then you start there, that's like a really good place to start writing in the key of blah, it's so obvious. When he pointed out, I was like, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
Yeah. Damn you, Ian, for being so bloody clever.
Brilliant guy. I did his Back to Basics strategy course actually last year.
Oh yeah, let's give that a plug. How do you find it?
Oh my gosh, I was in the pilot group, and he gave us, like, if all he did was pass you the reading material, that alone would have been amazing. But then he just kind of, like, obviously I'm not a strategist. I do find strategy really important. I refuse to use the word strategist as such, because I know that's a role in an ad agency. It means something in this industry. I wouldn't dare call myself that. But I feel a bit more confident now that he's taken us right back to the beginning, helped us fill in any gaps, and then just elevated the whole thing off to another level. Like, his knowledge is insane. The way he delivers it is so clear. I just found it really, really valuable. I would honestly say, if anyone has space in their professional development for their teams in terms of their strategists or their copywriters, or, honestly anyone within their teams, like, they get so much out of it. It's a great course.
Yeah, it is. I don't doubt that. I haven't done the course myself, but I'm not surprised to hear that. And I very recently recommended his Shot by Both Sides to a client. And I think very early on in the book, they made a comment along the lines of, wow, he's overwhelmingly clever, isn't he?
Yeah,
Yes.
That's bang on. He's overwhelmingly clever. Yes, he is.
You touched on strategy there, and I think it's nice to hear you say you're not going to claim to be a strategist, because that kind of exists in its own right, and you're not necessarily claiming that. But you do call yourself a stubbornly strategy first copywriter. So is that why you call yourself that, stubbornly?
Yes, and I think I mean that because too, the way I work with clients, typically I work directly with them as a freelancer. So there's, being into B2B as well, often the only marketing strategy they have is their content calendar, and the only marketing person they have is the office manager who basically manages that content calendar. So there's no one driving that bus. So I eventually had to just accept, okay, I'm going to have to step up into that role. And it's not like I don't have the skill to do that, to the degree that's required for what I do. I mean, I've got the marketing background. I'm more than curious enough to kind of, do that kind of digging. I think I wrote a piece very early on in my LinkedIn posting career, about how I'm no longer taking orders in my copywriting business. And what I meant by that is no more people rocking up and wanting to order, 10 blogs with a side of social. This ain't Burger King. Because so often that's not going to help people reach their business goals. They really need something else entirely. And really it becomes about asking the right questions and being prepared to kind of push back and say, look, I don't actually think that this is what you need something completely different. So I always insist that they go back to actually, at the very bare minimum, knowing why they're doing what they've asked me to do. And that's like a bare minimum thing. I really prefer them to have more than a passing. So often they come to me wanting to do things because it's something to do, and that's just not a good reason to pay someone to do something. And I know I probably do myself out of money sometimes, but I'd rather do that than give yourself a bad name by keep writing things for people that don't work. And that's none of us are service,
No, that's really reassuring to hear, because we often say something similar. I don't doubt I'd be a far richer man if I said yes more to certain briefs, but I think it's that want to kind of, I don't know if interrogate is the right word, and maybe that sounds a bit too ruthless, but understanding why this brief has been written and what the overall objective is fundamentally important, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And just making sure too that something actually has an idea behind it, because I think a lot of the time, a lot of content gets written by basically you get told a topic and then you go out and see what everyone else has written and you try and rewrite it so that's in air quotes original. And that's kind of what I mean when I say on my website, you can outspend or outsmart. I mean, if you're the category leader, you can just keep churning out that branded content, and you're the one putting out mountains of it. It's as good as an ad. People keep seeing your brand everywhere talking about this thing. But if you can't afford to buy the space to be the one doing that the most, you're just shouting into the void, or rather shouting under a pile of mattresses. So I'm just really wanting people to try and consider some of the other things that are out there, because there are other options other than pushing out things that no one wants to read.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually had hoped by now that practice would have at least slowed, if not stopped completely. But I suppose that's a foolish assumption that I had.
Yeah, it's probably the size of the companies too. Like as a freelancer, I work with much smaller companies than I might through, say, Kingswood Palmerston. It just depends. Like they just don't have the budget to spend on things like advertising, or at least you can't convince them to make the investment. So they default to the organic social blog posts sort of model. And yeah, it's very hard to I mean, we've taught people that the media is free, and then they're very, very reticent to invest in anything. Why would you pay a lot of money to put something out there when it's meant to be free? It's just, we've really trained people to think that way, which is a shame.
But I also think that it's I suppose it's human nature, isn't it? The same with any type of risk. You've got that natural risk aversion, and doing something that doesn't require fees is much easier to say yes to, I suppose.
Feels less risky, but I don't know. I've got my own opinions on how much risk you're taking when you go down that route. But yeah.
We've got so many listener questions coming up, by the way. So I want to talk very much about Kingswood and Palmerston before we move on to there, but just mindful, we've got a huge list here, and I have promised everyone we will ask these questions. So before we do move there, what inspired you to found Kingswood and Palmerston? Because that's something you're doing now with David Moore, with Elroy the cat.
Time, weather, and... We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles, at gasp.agency. Only last week, some pod listing companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and brand positioning. But we're definitely not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
The story starts, she said with glee, with a wizard chimpanzee.
Oh, the beautifully voiced Gem reading Gasp book. Adele writes an ad there, but not what we're after. Hang on.
Elroy the cat, that's it.
There we go.
Yeah, we met on Twitter during the pandemic, like during that first shutdown period, and it was like summer camp on Twitter. Like everyone was just really letting everybody else into their worlds and being quite vulnerable. And we connected over music and writing and advertising, of course, because they're the three things we're both really into. And him being a career ad man, so he's been everything from a copywriter to a creative director all the way up to agency president. So amazing mentor in my life and over the last couple of years. And then we just kind of realized we had the same philosophy around the kind of work we wanted to create and the way we worked, and both had this same B2B background and passion for the fact that could be so much better than it is, and that we could have such an impact. So we just pooled our creative resources and we tried a whole bunch of stuff to try and work together, and then over time came up with this idea of having a B2B thing. We're not going to try and be the agency of record. We're just going to go in, solve one that important but not urgent stone in your shoe marketing problem, and get out of there. Basically, they get to take the credit for the whole thing. And then we realized too, because he had this baby of ads for advertising agencies, and he's been plugging at that for ages now, and he's kind of LinkedIn famous for it. We realized, well, that still fits with our mission, because agencies are, of course, B2B businesses also. And a lot of their objections to promoting themselves are actually quite similar to any B2B, in saying things like the work speaks for itself. That's very much similar to the product-led B2B sensibility. And then they also get stumped on the media issue the same way that, where would I place an ad? Same objection. And then they always say things like, that I'm a relationship business or what have you. But our argument is, of course, like, if you believe in advertising, surely you need to be living that as much as you talk about it. But it just seems to be something people have stopped doing. I mean, it used to be, as you see from what David posts relentlessly on LinkedIn, there are so many examples in the past of these brilliant ads people would put out. And it meant that, your mum knew when you got a job at Ogilvy or something like that. That was a big deal. It was the sort of thing your parents would ring up and brag to their friends about. If you got a job at most advertising agencies now, people would be like, oh, that's nice. Because people just they don't have any idea, And I think we've lost sight of what that means for the industry.
I'm going to go back to how you articulated what Kingswood and Palmerston is, because I really do admire it, and I really do admire the way that you can so succinctly focus on something. But before I do, can I just ask, do you have a favourite ad for ad agencies that's been shared, as you say, relentlessly by David over the last few years?
My favourite one actually isn't one that he shared, because I think it was actually what must have been a video, and it's a bit blue in a way, but I loved the thought behind it. So it's like a shot of a guy pulling up in a car or something, but the line is, this is the important bit, we won't put our prostitutes as a line on your bill. Like, it's like we pay for our own prostitutes. It's like, okay, like, I think that's, it doesn't really work in today's world, but you gotta love that they really thought of, it reminds me, and he might not appreciate me saying it, but the guy that wrote Junior, and he talks about in his book how he advertised himself by saying he doesn't smell. And it's like, well, none of your other candidates have, like, they may well not smell, but they haven't said so. So that is a distinctive thing that I'm telling people about myself. It's like, okay, I can respect that. But yeah, he hasn't, and he probably won't share that one on LinkedIn. But
we can link to it in the show notes.
I definitely love that one. Yeah. Whew.
I love the Young and Rubicam, This Is a Backbone.
I think that would have been the second one. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's just one of those ads that is just so brutally simple and brilliant. And I shared it recently, funny enough, with a client of ours who was similarly waxing lyrical about it, because it is wonderful. And then going back to Kingswood and Palmerston, there's a line here. I didn't write this. I wish I had. I assume you wrote this. We're just a couple of B2B creative marketing consultants looking for trouble. Yours, not ours.
Yep.
I love that line. It's so good. When you read copy and just think, fuck, I wish I'd written that. It's so good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was funny because we both wrote bits of that website, and what we're both really proud of is that you really can't tell who wrote what. And we've gotten to a spot where we really don't remember. So I think that really speaks to the fact that I think we have created a tone of voice that we can both live out. We sort of share the responsibility of writing the ads that get posted on LinkedIn as well. So.
Oh no, it's great. It's absolutely brilliant. And do you find that whilst how you define yourselves is rightly very succinct, it's still because it's focused on, the problem that the client is having, does that then still lead to lots of variety? Because clients could have all sorts of issues that I think an agency or creative partnership could come and help at least diagnose and most likely solve.
Yeah, I mean, that really came from that insight that, any client that David or myself has ever worked with, their marketing team has always had a problem that, even their agency of record might have had a go at. And it could just be that all it takes is somebody who has absolutely no, they're not knees deep in the whole thing. They're not too close to it. They can take that outside of you. And it just suddenly, maybe you're trying to solve the wrong problem. Maybe it's that you really need to redefine the problem and you just haven't been able to do that. So I think it does lend itself. It could be anything. It could be, I can't even think of, my mind's gone blank. I can't think of a bunch of examples, but it really could be.
But it could be internal, presumably, like internal comms issues as well as external facing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely true. And that does give us that variety. You don't get bored.
Yeah, well, no, exactly that. And also I think it keeps you sharp, doesn't it? When you're not just doing this, trying to solve the same problem, just albeit in a different industry, perhaps. It keeps you nimble and
Yeah. We didn't want to be a consultancy where we had one slide deck that we just rolled out everywhere and just kept, doing this. This wasn't what we wanted to do. So I think this model allows us to not do that, which is an added bonus.
And just quickly, why do you think agencies aren't putting their money where their mouth is in terms of doing more to advertise themselves? Is it because the money isn't there like it used to be?
Oh, well, they do. Yeah, they do have really ridiculously skinny margins. And in a way, that's why we say, it costs you double to take on the work of doing it yourself, because every billable hour you put into writing your own ads, that's an hour you could have been billing out to a client. So that's one of our sales pitch points. But at the end of the day, I honestly think it's they're too close to it. They really don't know what to say about themselves, because it's really hard to. I mean, any copywriter who's written their own website knows takes you skillfully avoid it for ages because you just sort of don't know what to say, and you're worried, like any business, you're worried you're going to alienate potential customers, and when you're operating on those skinny margins, you don't want to turn work away. But like we always tell our clients, you can put a flag out saying, like, this is what we do. It doesn't mean that other people won't come to your door because they like the cut of your jib. You'll still get all kinds of people coming to you, but you can still put it out there. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is who we serve, and do it in a really interesting way. But I think too, like, maybe it's just this slight worry about the work sucking as well. And there's no difficult client to hide behind. Like, you can't say, we had this great idea and it got diluted by politics and whatnot. Like, you have to just stand there and own it. And I think that's difficult. No, you can't argue with it. It's just difficult.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. Right then, should we do our listener questions? I lied, actually. We've got 5, but I'm going to 2 have come from David, so I'm going to only allow him 1, and I'm yet to decide which one that is. So, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. Let's start with alumni and really good friend of the show, John Lyons, who asks, are there any contemporary songwriters that you think would make a good copywriter?
Yes. Now, I was thinking about this just the other day, actually. It's funny. And I'd have to say it would be probably, I'm not even into this genre of music, but it would be rap and hip hop artists. And the reason I say that is because they're the only ones who still have their fight face on. So you think back to your Jonis, your Bob Dylans, Joan Baez, they had something they were standing for. And a lot of music now is kind of just, I don't know, just guff. But rap music, there's still like every line is like an idea. And that reminds me of something I heard Paul Simon say once, which is that when he moved from writing his troubadour type story-led songs to more of his world music, that's when the music is defined by the beat, not by what he writes. So he had to start writing like that. It was just like these rapid fire ideas, and that's where it's quite similar to the rap. I'm not familiar with any artists. I have to say I I'm probably revealing myself as a complete noob or idiot. I mean, in terms of like rap music, but I actually really like Eminem. I don't know where he sits in like the hierarchy of cool, but what I love about exactly. I love, like he once said, like people say to me, oh, you know, these words don't rhyme or whatever. And he's like, but he finds a way to bend the rhythm or push something out to kind of make it happen. And it's just that harnessing of rhythm. It reminds me of Frank Sinatra, actually, because sometimes when he would sing, he would push out a phrase or he'd push out a note so far and be like, oh my God, is he going to make it? And he always did. Like it was kind of like this tension in listening to the music. So yeah, I think that's probably my first answer. And then also Sean Rowe is another guy that he's not well known, but he sings this song at the end of The Accountant, which was a movie I barely put up with. But right at the end, there was this song that just punched me in the guts, and it's not coming to me right now. But the lyrics to that are gorgeous, like really Dylan-esque. So I think he's really special. Leave Something Behind. There you go. That's the song.
Okay, nice. We'll link to that too. Well, funny enough, John actually asked this on LinkedIn, and he and I both kind of had a bit of a debate about what our answers would be, and we went exactly to that same genre. And John believes Nas is the correct answer, but I wholeheartedly agree it's Method Man.
Okay.
I've had a conversation recently actually with a guy called Soul about Wu-Tang Clan, which sounds ridiculous as a middle-aged white guy, but I remember 36 Chambers when it came out. I was about 12, I think, at the time, and it just blew my mind. Like the lyrics and the writing were just utterly insane. And Method Man, especially, is definitely worth looking into.
I will look him or them or whoever they are up.
Even if you don't listen to the music or enjoy the music, if you just look up the lyrics, it's just the way that, like you said with Eminem, who is also an incredibly talented writer, the way that they can break structure and stretch syllables and make things fit that, as you were saying, words might not rhyme, but the way that it's broken down and delivered is just incredible.
You have to admire that, even if you're not a fan.
Yes. Do you like Rodriguez at all? He's probably best known for the Search for Sugar Man documentary.
Oh, that's one I've been meaning to. Yeah, I don't know, but I've been meaning to watch that, so I'll have to.
It's worth looking into, but I think his lyrics are incredible too. He's more folk-like in terms of. I think he gets compared to Bob Dylan.
I'll definitely like it then. So yeah.
Yeah, no, he's remarkable. Cool. Well, sticking with music then, Lucente. I've just murdered your surname. I'm really sorry. I should have just said Louis. Would you rather sing a duet with Paul Simon or Joni Mitchell? I think I know the answer.
Oh, I thought I knew the answer too, and then I started thinking about it. Well, I feel like maybe Paul Simon, only because my voice is really similar to Joni Mitchell's, and I feel like it just wouldn't. You wouldn't, yeah. I feel like it would be a better contrast to sing with Paul Simon. Plus, I just love his songs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, both of them have come up already, so it's a very good question. And then Kate Taylor, who's a freelance writer, she's roped me in too on this one, and I can go first or second, depending on your choice. Talking of robots from the future, I don't remember when we were talking of robots from the future, but this is maybe we were on LinkedIn. What are, Carolyn, and your thoughts on AI copywriting? Robocopy, dead or alive, it's coming for our jobs, ?
I have to say I ain't bothered, because I feel like a bot will it could pick up where, and don't hate me, content writers, because I know you're not a homogenous species, but they could pick up the I string words together, I string sentences together coherently sort of jobs. But they can't account for the randomness of human beings and our emotions and brilliant ideas. Like they can definitely take over the content mill jobs. No worries. They can have those. I'm not bothered. I'll be over here writing stuff for people who want the advantage of distinctiveness and cut through.
Yeah, well said. Well, that's kind of my answer, but I wouldn't have delivered it as well or articulately. Just imagine a clunkier one. It reminds me a bit of actually of there's a remark, and I've definitely referenced it before, that I remember Tom Goodwin giving to someone on LinkedIn, and it was quite ruthless, this reply, and yet it was also quite brilliant. And I think the question was something like, oh Christ, what was it? I'm doing a promotional piece of marketing. What are the best words? Or it was something. It was just a ludicrous question. And Tom's reply was, I'm writing a song. What's the best notes?
Yeah.
And it's just like, and AI algorithms are mind-blowingly advanced, and I accept that I'm probably going to have to, trivialize it slightly to make this point. But I can't help but think that the algorithms will be based on, as you said, how to structure sentences and grammatical rules and so on and so forth, and almost fall into that kind of efficiency of words over effectiveness of words type trap.
Yeah.
And I just can't see it being a realistic threat.
No.
And that's probably, famous last words before the robots kill us all and take over. So who knows?
Well, I think if we've gotten to a spot where robots can have better ideas than we can, then we're probably stuffed. So, yeah.
Right. Which question from David? So your business partner, David Moore, I think he wanted me to ask the second one. Sorry, David, but I think the first one's better. How about, so he says, do you find writing Aussie English, British English and or American English challenging? How do you keep the metaphors, idioms and just plain weird quirks straight?
Okay. I think this is an interesting one because we talk about this a lot. So I've grown up in Australia, absolutely bathed in content from the UK and the US because we only have to have 9% Australian content by law on it. That's the minimum they've set, and we really, up until quite recently, didn't produce all that much of our own. So I grew up watching the ABC, which was almost 75% BBC shows, and then later on commercial TV, which was just American stuff. So that's second nature really to me. And then switching between voices is like switching between singing voices. I've sung every kind of music from jazz to pop to choir to everything, and it's just putting yourself in that headspace. And really it just comes down to remembering to switch the S's to Z's. That's the hardest part. But and dropping the U's. I'm sticking U's in everything. So in the American one, he gives me crap about that all the time. He'll laugh at that.
Okay. Let's sneak his other one in because I feel bad now. Why do you think so much B2B copy is so poorly and stiffly written? Don't these people read?
Honestly, I think it comes down to something I referenced earlier, which is I think it's the not knowing what to say. So because they spend so much time in that space of we're a sales-led business, got our quarterly focus on sales KPIs, they really just don't spend a lot of time thinking about those things that you would do when you're investing in brand. So what makes us different? What do we stand for? They really have nothing to say. And when you don't have anything to say, you panic and you start writing. Or you look and see what everyone else has said, which is how you come up with, the line I've got on my website, which is meant to be an example of bad B2B copy. And I don't know it off the top of my head, but, you start solutionizing things and, stuff like that. It's just things to say. They really don't know what they're saying, so they just start talking and hope for the best.
Good answer. Good answers. Right, so the final part of the interview, just a lot more questions at you, Carolyn. The 4 pertinent posers, and they start with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think it would be to play. Stop taking everything so seriously, because I've come to understand that life's honestly a bit of a mess and a bit of a weird experience, and play is so important. And I think we forget that as we grow up. The way kids create, they really just, my kids make like 1,000 pictures a day and bits of writing and stuff, and they don't care if it's good. I remember handing my mum one of those macaroni pictures that you make at kindergarten, and actually saying to her,
fall off in the bits fall off, don't they, in the first week?
And actually said to her quite famously, "Oh, you don't need to keep that." And by that, I think I meant that the result was not the point. It was just, I was just making things happen and marveling at this ability that humans have to make things and just make things happen. And I wish I'd had that in my pocket for the last decade, because I really forgot how to be creative for a while and being back on Twitter on during the pandemic, I found myself back around advertising people, and we talk so much about creativity that it just got me back into that headspace. I just wish I'd stayed there and grown up in that soil, because I feel like it would have served me really well. So yeah, definitely play more. That would have been it.
If you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
I think yesterday I would have said fear, because it's the weed crowding out creativity in the industry, and everyone's, clients are too scared to do anything in case it doesn't work. Agency are scared to lose clients. CMOs are scared to get chucked out of their jobs, and no one wins when fear's the stadium we're playing on. But I think today I got rather upset because I saw advertising people referred to as advertising bunnies, and who are in charge of the sexy stuff. And that really got my blood up. I hope I wasn't too rude in the tweet that I replied to that guy on. But I'm just really tired of, and this isn't everyone, but there's a tendency amongst marketers to look down on advertising and say, oh, they only deal with one tiny piece of 1p. And it's like, yeah, okay. That makes us experts. What other industry do we look down on people who are experts in a narrow field? That really got my blood up. So I'll try not to get too riled up over it. But yeah, I think that's probably one thing I think we could definitely just put out with the next garbage collection. Thanks.
Yeah. Well said. I don't think it helps. It doesn't really help. I'm sure there's a confidence crisis in the industry at the moment, and that kind of perception of people and their roles and what they actually do is all kind of wrapped up in that.
Yeah, the fear thing feeds into everything for sure. It's bad business.
Yeah, completely. Number 3, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Oh, yes. Okay. Anything by David Sedaris, and you can start with the Santaland Diaries, which I can actually give you a link for. So I'll pop that in the show notes. But I would really recommend people listen, if they can, to an audiobook of it, because there's a performative element to his writing and no one can read it like he does. So anything by David Sedaris is amazing. Anything by Margaret Atwood, of course, and I encourage people to go beyond The Handmaid's Tale, because she has written many, many other things. And the reason for that being is that she's the daughter of a scientist. I believe her dad was an entomologist. I think that explains the way she holds the world at an arm's length and takes almost an anthropological view of her writing. So she tends to like to put humans in situations and put pressure on them and then see how they behave. And I love that about her writing, because, and so much of the time now we look back on things she's written even in the 60s and 70s and go, oh my gosh, she's a time traveler or something. But I think when you're someone who just understands human behavior, you put a certain situation in front of them, you can kind of predict what they're going to do. So I feel like that's a behavioral psychology with a spoonful of sugar. So definitely worth reading her stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, about Margaret Atwood. I mean, even if we do just look at Handmaid's Tale and some of the monstrous decisions that are happening in the US at the moment, the parallels are quite frightening.
They are frightening, yeah. And then there's I've got a couple more if you've got time, but
yes, please. Oh, yeah.
Paul Simon audio biography by Malcolm Gladwell. Whatever we think, I quite like Malcolm Gladwell. He gets a lot of shade, but this particular book was it was less about his little views on things and more about Paul Simon. So I think anyone would like it. But it's a very cool concept having an audio biography like that as well, because you can only get it as an audio book, because so much of the time it's Paul playing things and singing them in real time to demonstrate what they're talking about. So you can't really read it. But yeah, that's an amazing book to listen to, just like light bulbs going off in your head every 2 seconds, just incredible stuff. And then the last one I'd probably say is Pat Patterson's How to Write Better Lyrics, because I think it's great to look outside your own discipline for lessons in how to do your job better. And that's a great one for copywriters. It's just a different way of thinking about ways to connect ideas, and it's just generally a good book.
Well, we'll link to all of those. I'm going to link to Junior as well, because you mentioned that earlier, and I think that's well worth plugging. We always dedicate every episode to someone, Carolyn, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest who has to give the reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Yeah, well, unofficially, I feel like I've already dedicated it to David Moore as my business partner, and he's had an enormous impact on my career over the past couple of years. And the benefit of that can't be overstated. But in a nice full circle kind of a way. He's literally the last person I've met in advertising, because I met him really recently. I travelled to the US and actually met him. So he's the last person I met who worked in advertising. The very first person I ever met in advertising was my mum. So she passed away when I was in my mid-teens, but just before she actually, one of the last things she said to me was that she thought I would enjoy working in advertising and maybe as a copywriter. So this whole thing was kind of her idea.
That's fantastic.
So she actually worked for Philip Adams, who was a big name in Australian advertising. He was the Adams in Monaghan, Damon and Adams, which won't mean anything to anyone anymore, but they were the agency that came up with Life Be In It and the Slip Slap campaigns, which will mean a lot to anybody from where I'm from. So, she had a pretty good spell with them.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's link to those as well, those campaigns. I'm sure they'll be...
Yeah, they're very brilliant and well-known. Yeah, very good stuff.
And was that in Melbourne?
Yes, that was Melbourne, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this episode is really proudly dedicated to your mum.
Yeah. Her name was Diane. There you go.
Diane, to Diane. So as a final call to action, everything we've discussed, links to all of the books, to Kingswood and Palmerston, ads for ad agencies. I'll link to Ian Pritchard's course that we plugged earlier, if that's okay with you too, Carolyn. But how else can our listeners get more Carolyn Barclay? Yeah,
so I'm on the Twitters as at yes no which was the name of my very first ever blog that is now defunct. And you can see I'm on LinkedIn. You can definitely follow us on Kingswood and Palmerston, and we're on LinkedIn and Twitter under that moniker. I've got my website, that's my maiden name, Carolyn Barclay, copywriter. I think that takes care of it.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, we'll make sure all of those links, including your website, are included in the show notes.
Thank you very much.
This has been excellent, Carolyn. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh no, thank you for having me. It's so kind of you.
Thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.